In our headlines on this Thursday, August 21st, here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung is traveling to Tokyo this weekend for a summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and then heading to Washington, D.C. for talks with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump next Monday. And President Lee Jae-myung shares his thoughts on past agreements between Seoul and Tokyo aimed at addressing their differences over history and his three-stage plan to nuclear disarmament on the Korean peninsula. Meanwhile, at the parliament on this Thursday, the main opposition party launches a filibuster in response to efforts by the ruling party to railroad its final media reform bill. We start here on the local front, where the presidential office has shared the president's upcoming agenda in neighboring Japan and over in the U.S. as he embarks on his diplomatic mission this coming Saturday. Arirang Song Yoo-jin files this report from the top office.
Ahead of his upcoming visits to Japan and the United States, this is what President Lee Jae-myung told his top aides on Thursday.
현재 국제 정세와 또 무역 질서가 재편되는 중에 풀어야 할 현안들이 너무 많습니다. 국가 이익을 최우선에 두고 호혜적인 외교 안보 정책이 실현될 수 있도록 최선을 다하겠습니다.
The president's remarks came after the presidential office released more details of his trips. President Lee and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung will first depart for Tokyo on Saturday morning. Upon arrival, the first appointment is a luncheon with members of the Korean community in Japan, followed by a summit with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in the afternoon and an official dinner.
Through the summit, the leaders of South Korea and Japan will strengthen the foundations for future-oriented cooperation, enhance trilateral coordination with the U.S., and hold candid discussions on regional and global issues, including peace and stability in the region.
Then on Sunday, President Lee will meet with members of Japan's parliament before heading to Washington, D.C. He's expected to arrive in the American capital that afternoon and begin a 3-day stay by having dinner with Korean residents in the U.S. The big day will be Monday, when he will have his first face-to-face meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House.
The two leaders will discuss ways to advance peace and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. They are also expected to deepen economic cooperation based on the recent trade agreement, particularly in semiconductors, batteries, and shipbuilding.
The president is also scheduled to meet figures from business and academic circles. Finally, on Tuesday, President Lee will travel to Philadelphia to tour a shipyard recently acquired by Korea's Hanwha Group. The yard is seen as a symbolic venue for Seoul and Washington's shipbuilding cooperation. The Air Force One jet will take off from the U.S. on Tuesday evening and return to Korea early Thursday. So the presidential office says National Security Advisor Wi Sung-rak will provide more specifics on these back-to-back trips, as well as the agenda for each summit on Friday. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
In the meantime, President Lee Jae-myung has reaffirmed his commitment to a future-oriented partnership with neighboring Japan. The commitment, that is, was conveyed during an interview with a Japanese daily ahead of his travel to Tokyo this coming weekend. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min has more.
Overturning past agreements with Japan undesirable. That was according to President Lee Jae-myung in an interview with Japan's Yomiuri Shimbun, released on Thursday, referring to past agreements on wartime issues of Korean sex slaves and forced laborers. Lee says though the deals finalized under previous conservative governments are difficult to accept, they are commitments made between nations. At the same time, he noted the feelings of the Korean people should be taken into account, adding that what's more important is offering words of consolation in a sincere manner. In 2015, the so-called Comfort Women Agreement was reached under the Park Geun-hye administration, and in 2023, the third-party compensation scheme for wartime laborers was agreed under the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Those agreements sparked some backlash in Korea. calling Japan very important. Lee also stressed the importance of the Seoul-Tokyo relationship ahead of his talks with Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba this weekend in Tokyo, hoping to expand cooperation on the economy, society, and culture. The liberal-leaning leader highly appreciated the Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi Declaration, signed in 1998, to chart a new path for a future-oriented partnership, based upon which he expressed hopes to announce a new joint declaration that goes beyond.
I think we can expect something. A final coordination is needed, so it's hard to tell at the moment.
Cooperation with Japan, as well as trilateral cooperation with the U.S., is crucial in more than one way: North Korea. President Lee did mention the North Korea nuclear issue, outlining a three-stage roadmap for the first time that involves freezing, reducing, and dismantling the North nuclear and missile programs. He added that this will be pursued while maintaining a close coordination with the U.S. and pursuing active inter-Korean dialogue. He also pitched multilateral cooperation involving the U.S., Russia, the two Koreas, and Japan on the Arctic Shipping Route project. On China, President Lee said there are aspects of competition and cooperation when it comes to the bilateral relationship, adding it should be managed, taking into account various aspects. When the South Korean leader wraps up his talks with Ishiba this weekend in Tokyo, he'll be flying straight to Washington for his first summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung sat down with Bill Gates, chair of the Gates Foundation, here in Seoul earlier on this Thursday. On their agenda were issues of universal concern, ranging from global health to future technologies. President Lee also took the occasion to applaud Gates' contributions to vaccine development and distribution, as well as his commitment to clean energy, while making note of Microsoft Windows' role in expanding humanity's window to the world. Gates, meanwhile, touched upon South Korea's transition from a recipient of international aid to becoming a significant donor in global development. He further asserted that small modular reactors could address rising energy demand, and the president reaffirmed the potential of Korean entities to lead the market in that area. And presiding over a weekly meeting with his aides this afternoon, President Lee Jae-myung cast a grave light on South Korea's suicide rates, urging for a paradigm shift to prevent such unfortunate losses of lives while calling them a social disaster. Noting that suicide statistics here in the country are among the highest in the OECD, the president emphasized the need for tangible action. Accordingly, officials have been asked to frame out comprehensive policies that involve a pan-governmental body to support mental health. At the Parliament on this Thursday, the main opposition party has launched a filibuster in response to efforts by the ruling party to railroad its final media reform bill. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young has details.
The second of three media reform bills aimed at reshaping the governance of public broadcasters has passed the National Assembly. The ruling Democratic Party on Thursday unilaterally pushed through an amendment to the Foundation for Broadcast Culture Act to reduce government influence over public broadcasters by increasing the foundation's board from 9 to 13 members. The foundation is the main shareholder of public broadcaster MBC. Of the 171 votes cast, 169 were in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstained amid a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party. The bill passed the Assembly last year but was then vetoed by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. It was introduced again by the DP during a plenary session earlier this month, but was not voted on as the July extraordinary session came to a close following a PPP filibuster. Following Thursday's vote, the DP brought forward a final media reform bill targeting EBS, again triggering a filibuster by the PPP.
The bill aims to ensure the educational broadcasting system's independence and political neutrality by expanding its board to include experts and representatives from various fields, and by improving transparency in selecting its president.
If we hand over the management and operation of public broadcasting, resources entrusted to us by the people, to those with no mandate, it would betray the trust of the people who gave us authority through representative democracy.
Under the National Assembly Act, a filibuster on each bill can be halted after 24 hours if at least 3/5 of the parliament agrees to do so. The final media reform bill is expected to be put to a vote immediately after the filibuster ends. However, no new legislation will be taken up on Friday as the rival parties agreed not to handle bills on the day of the PPP convention and instead add another session next Monday. The DP had initially planned to hold plenary sessions from Thursday to Sunday to push ahead with contentious bills left unresolved during the July extraordinary session. Next in line are the so-called Yellow Envelope Bill, an amendment to labor union laws, and a revision to the Commercial Act, with the PPP also planning to launch further filibusters, arguing the bills are being pushed forward without bipartisan agreement. 신하영, 아리랑 뉴스.
Meanwhile, on the trade front, exports during the first 20 days of August expanded 7.6% on-year, despite a decline in shipments to the U.S. According to the Korea Customs Service, exports amounted to $35.5 billion, driven by cars, chips and ships, as has been the trend in recent times. Now, by country, shipments to the EU, China, Taiwan and Vietnam surged, while those to the U.S. slumped 2.7% in light of tariffs. Meanwhile, imports during the first 20 days of this month totaled $34.7 billion, allowing for a trade surplus of $800 million. A delicious partnership has been struck to better promote the snacks enjoyed by the fictional K-pop girl group in KPop Demon Hunters, all in line with the growing demand from fans worldwide. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
If you're a fan of Korean food, you will know that the ramen and the crackers Huntrix couldn't give up even during a fight with demons are actually real. And of course, this is a perfect chance for the company behind them. Nongshim announced on Wednesday that Shinramyeon and shrimp crackers will be collaborating with Netflix to distribute limited editions in markets like Korea, the US, and Europe.
Just as K-Pop Demon Hunters has introduced K-culture to the world, Nongshim will use this collaboration to genuinely share the taste and value of K-ramyeon and K-snacks with global consumers.
This is not just limited to Nongshim for Korean food and culture in general. According to Google Trends, searches for Korea worldwide surged to their highest level in nearly 3 years during the week of July 17th to 23rd. Interest even surpassed the spike seen last December when then-President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. Since the release of K-pop Demon Hunters on June 20th, global searches for Korea have nearly doubled. Searches for Korean food also jumped to an all-time high, up 75% following the show's debut. And the government says it's not going to miss this chance. President Lee Jae-myung himself met with K-pop Demon Hunters creator Maggie Kang for an Arirang TV special amid the hype and pledged to create a firm foundation for the culture industry.
겉으로는 화려해 보이지만 토대가 과연 튼튼하냐? 사실 속이 좀 비어 있지 않냐? 뿌리가 좀 썩어가지 않냐? 라는 지적을 하는데 공감하거든요. 튼튼한 뿌리를 만드는 역할을 우리 정부가 할 텐데 지금부터 시작이다.
There is somewhere to begin. Despite the Netflix films' global success, the estimated 1 trillion won, or roughly $750 million intellectual property value of K-pop Demon Hunters will flow to the US platform Netflix and Japan's Sony Pictures. None of the world's top 50 IP holders are Korean firms, according to a recent study by the Korea Chamber of Commerce. By contrast, the US dominates with 32, followed by Japan with 7 and China and France with 2 each. The economic stakes are massive. Disney alone generated about $62 billion last year through IP-based businesses like Mickey Mouse and Marvel. Collectively, America's top IP companies earn revenues equivalent to around 13% of Korea's entire GDP. For Korea, still heavily dependent on manufacturing exports, such figures highlight why building a homegrown super IP may be crucial to future growth. 김도현, 아리랑 뉴스.
In other news, the U.S. Federal Reserve's annual Jackson Hole Economic Symposium kicks off on this Thursday, with much anticipation surrounding Chairman Jerome Powell's speech that is expected to set the path of monetary policy for the foreseeable future. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young reports.
Central bankers from around the world are convening in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, for the Federal Reserve's annual conference. All eyes are on Fed Chair Jerome Powell, slated to deliver a speech on Friday morning local time. His address comes amidst political pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who continues to push for interest rate cuts. Market expectations are divided on what Chairman Powell will signal. This is due to the conflicting signals emanating from the crucial economic indicators, employment and inflation data. Employment indicators have begun to show signs of stress. U.S. employment growth in July proved weaker than anticipated. U.S. non-farm payrolls increased by 73,000 jobs in July, following a downwardly revised 14,000 increase in June, the fewest gains in nearly 5 years. Weakening employment data suggests a potential economic downturn, increasing the impetus for rate cuts.
We do expect the Federal Reserve to favor that side of the mandate. So, focusing more on the employment side versus the inflation side. And if we do see incremental weakening in labor market conditions in the upcoming weeks, I think Chair Powell wants to give himself a route to start to resume those interest rate cuts if that's indeed what happens with the data looking forward.
Conversely, the inflation picture remains unstable. The U.S. Producer Price Index for July surged by 0.9%, exceeding the forecasted 0.2% increase and the largest monthly increase since June 2022. This inflationary pressure hinders prospects for rate cuts. Meanwhile, minutes from the Fed's July session indicate that most policymakers largely agreed on maintaining the interest rate at 4.25% to 4.5%, primarily citing heightened inflation risks stemming from President Trump's tariff policies. Notably, however, two members of the Fed committee dissented from this status quo, voting instead for a 25 basis point rate cut at the last policy meeting on July 29th and 30th. This marks the first time since 1993 that more than one Fed governor has voted against a rate decision. Moon Ji-young, 아리랑 뉴스.
Elsewhere, Russia claims talks on security guarantees for Ukraine are pointless without its presence. Our Park Jun-han explains.
While the U.S. and NATO have been discussing possible security guarantees for Ukraine as part of a peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Moscow on Wednesday said security discussions without Moscow are a road to nowhere.
We cannot agree with the fact that it is now proposed to resolve collective security issues without the Russian Federation. And I am sure that in the West, and above all in the United States, they understand perfectly well that seriously discussing security issues without the Russian Federation is a utopia, a road to nowhere.
This comes as NATO military leaders discuss security guarantees for Ukraine in a post-conflict scenario. Although the specifics were not revealed, it is believed that in-depth talks took place on implementing the European-led security guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine has strongly disagreed on Russia's involvement in security guarantees since early stages of war back in 2022. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, when asked about negotiations to end the Ukraine war, stated that both Russia and Ukraine should at least come to the table and figure out how things could work out. Vance also made it clear that European nations should take most of the security burden and said the U.S. will not make commitments until it knows what's going to be necessary to stop the war in the first place.
But no matter what happens, no matter what form this takes, the Europeans are going to have to take the lion's share of the burden. It's their continent, it's their security, and the president's been very clear they're going to have to step up here.
Meanwhile, U.S.-based outlet Politico reported on Tuesday that the Hungarian capital Budapest could be the host of a trilateral summit, bringing together the three leaders from the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. However, some media outlets have said that the trilateral summit could now be in doubt as Russia has insisted that it must be given equal footing with other countries such as the US, China, the UK, and France when it comes to discussing any security guarantees for Ukraine. 박준환, 아리랑 뉴스.
Israel is calling to duty tens of thousands of reservists ahead of a full-scale ground offensive into Gaza City, which it says serves as Hamas's governing stronghold. Our Yoon-jin has the latest.
After Israeli troops clashed with Hamas fighters in the Palestinian enclave on Wednesday, Prime Minister Netanyahu instructed the military to shorten the timeline for taking control of Hamas strongholds and defeating the militant group. Israel Defense Forces spokesman Brigadier General Efi Defrin said Wednesday that the military has begun preliminary action and is ready on the outskirts of Gaza City.
We will deepen the damage to the terror infrastructure above and below the ground and sever the population's dependence on Hamas. We are not waiting. We have begun the preliminary operations and the first stages of the attack on Gaza City. IDF forces are already holding the outskirts of Gaza City.
The Israeli military called up around 60,000 reservists on Wednesday ahead of a planned ground offensive aimed at capturing and occupying all of Gaza City, a massive assault with the aim of eliminating Hamas. These reserve soldiers were not expected to report for duty until September. And when Israel's security cabinet first approved the takeover of Gaza City, officials had expected the plan to take up to 5 months, giving an interval that would allow for mediators to bridge gaps between Hamas and Israel over truce terms. Hamas said it accepted a ceasefire deal on Monday, proposed by mediators Qatar and Egypt, for a 60-day truce and the release of around half of the hostages. Israel did not submit a formal response, but insisted it would only accept a comprehensive deal that releases all the hostages. Following Israel's latest offensive on Wednesday, Hamas has accused Netanyahu of disregarding the mediator's ceasefire proposal, calling him the real obstructionist of any agreement. Yoon-jin, 아리랑 뉴스.
Even though August is coming to an end, the scorching heat continues. The temperature is staying high due to the humid southwesterly winds and the hot sun. Heat wave warnings have been issued in most parts of the country and have been strengthened once more. The season of tussle, which means welcoming the autumn on the traditional calendar, is just around the corner, but the heat seems to be getting stronger and stronger. On Saturday, the daytime temperature in Seoul will rise to 33 degrees Celsius, and the heat waves and tropical nights are expected to continue until next week. Tomorrow, morning temperatures will start at around 25 degrees all over the country. Daily highs move up to 32 degrees in Seoul, Gyeongju 36 degrees. Clouds will often appear nationwide until this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.